and are very generous with their time in a way that, if you look at the media.
For decades, Queen Elizabeth II was seen as untouchable, a constant, a figure so controlled and composed that many believed nothing could ever surprise her or come out about her. But according to reports circulating quietly among royal insiders, there was something the Queen prepared long before her passing. Something so personal, so guarded, that it wasn't discovered until years later. And when Princess Anne finally came face to face with it, those close to the palace say it changed everything.
Palace officials had debated what to do with it, whether to open it immediately after the Queen's death, or to respect what appeared to be her wishes for privacy.
Never did. While other royals made headlines, Anne stayed quiet, worked relentlessly, and protected the institution without asking for praise. Royal watchers have long noted that Anne mirrored her mother's discipline more than any of her siblings. And that may be exactly why, when the time came, Anne was the one chosen. According to multiple accounts, were sealed personal materials kept separate from the official royal archives. Not routine correspondence, not state papers, but private writings, letters, and items believed to reflect the Queen's inner thoughts, things she never intended to be read casually or released quickly. Palace officials reportedly debated what to do with them for years. Opening them too soon felt wrong. Waiting too long risked losing context. Eventually, the responsibility fell to Anne. What it encountered wasn't history as the public knew it. It wasn't polished. It wasn't ceremonial. Reports suggest the writings revealed a side of Elizabeth the world rarely saw: a woman overwhelmed. Long before she mastered the crown, in reflections believed to date back to the early 1950s, the Queen reportedly wrote about fear, about suddenly carrying an ancient institution while still grieving her father, about the loneliness of leadership when there is no one you can speak to honestly. Those close to the situation say Anne was struck not by scandal, but by emotion. The writings weren't dramatic. They were quiet, heavy. They showed a woman who questioned herself constantly while presenting absolute certainty to the world. A woman who understood that any crack in the image could weaken the monarchy itself. And so she swallowed doubt again and again, until silence became instinct as the material moved forward in time. Reports claim the tone shifted, but the weight never lifted. There were reflections on motherhood, on guilt, on missing moments she could never get back. Elizabeth reportedly wrote about choosing duty over family more times than she could count, and how that choice never stopped hurting. She didn't frame herself as a victim, but she didn't excuse the cost either. There has also been quiet speculation that some writings touched on family turmoil the public only partially understands. Rumors suggest Elizabeth privately reflected on Charles's struggles, Diana's presence within the institution, and the chaos that followed their breakdown. What stands out, according to those familiar with the material, is not blame, but restraint. Elizabeth reportedly believed speaking publicly would only deepen wounds, even if silence made her appear cold. But not everything was emotional reflection. One document in particular has drawn intense private discussion. It's been said that Elizabeth recorded details of a serious security scare involving the royal family, one never fully disclosed to the public. The specifics remain tightly guarded, but sources suggest it left the Queen shaken in a way few events ever did. Her reasoning for keeping it quiet, according to these reports, was simple. Public fear would do more harm than silence ever could. That theme appears again and again. Silence as protection. Silence as sacrifice. Perhaps the most significant piece, though, wasn't a journal at all. It was reportedly a personal letter written directly to Anne not long before Elizabeth's passing. In it, the Queen is said to have acknowledged the cost of her approach, the distance, the misunderstandings, the perception that she was unfeeling when, in reality, she felt everything. She didn't ask Anne to release anything. She didn't demand secrecy either. Instead, she placed the burden of judgment in Anne's hands. That decision alone speaks volumes. Anne reportedly spent days absorbing what she had read before speaking to anyone. Even then, she didn't act alone. King Charles was brought in privately. What he read, sources claim, affected him deeply. For the first time, he saw his mother's doubts laid bare, her fears, her regrets, and perhaps most difficult of all, her thoughts about him written with honesty she never allowed herself to express out loud. No decisions were made quickly, and that, insiders say, was intentional. These weren't just family documents. They carried implications for the monarchy's future. Charles, already navigating a different kind of reign than his mother, reportedly found himself questioning where openness helps and where it harms. Prince William, too, is said to have taken particular interest. As someone preparing for a future Elizabeth once feared herself, William reportedly saw warnings in her words about isolation, about protecting children while preparing them for a life they never chose, about dignity that can easily turn into emotional distance if left unchecked. Even Harry, despite his complicated position, was reportedly given limited access to material relating to his mother. That alone suggests the family understands the emotional gravity of what was uncovered. For now, the contents remain sealed, preserved, guarded. Anne has become, somewhat unexpectedly, the keeper of her mother's truth. Not the public version, the private one. And that role has given her quiet influence within the family, though those close to her say she carries it heavily, not proudly. Behind palace walls, debate continues. Some argue that selective release years from now could humanize the monarchy in ways Elizabeth never allowed herself to do. Others insist that honoring her privacy means locking everything away forever. Both sides claim to be protecting her legacy, and maybe that's the final irony. Elizabeth spent her life ensuring the crown outlived her. She absorbed pressure, hid pain, and made peace with being misunderstood. The materials she left behind don't rewrite her reign, but they deepen it. They show that stability wasn't effortless. It was earned through restraint, sacrifice, and a level of emotional endurance few could survive. Princess Anne now holds that truth. Whether the world ever sees it remains uncertain. But one thing is clear to those who have read her words. Behind the crown was a human heart, and it carried far more than anyone ever knew. What makes this discovery even more unsettling is what it suggests about how much of Queen Elizabeth's reign was built on restraint rather than certainty for 70 years. The public saw consistency.com/control, but according to those familiar with the private materials, that composure was often a deliberate performance one Elizabeth believed was necessary to keep the institution intact. She understood that the monarchy didn't survive on honesty alone. It survived on confidence. And confidence, once shaken, is nearly impossible to restore. That belief shaped how she handled nearly every crisis. When criticism mounted, she stayed quiet. When the press turned hostile, she waited. When the public demanded emotion, she measured every word. Not because she didn't care, but because she feared that showing too much humanity would weaken the crown. The irony, insiders say, is that this very strategy may have created the distance people later resented her for. The writings reportedly show Elizabeth wrestling with this contradiction repeatedly. She knew the world was changing faster than the monarchy could adapt. She watched media evolve from respectful distance to relentless intrusion. She saw how personal vulnerability became currency. And yet she chose to remain unchanged. Not out of stubbornness, but out of duty. She believed someone had to hold the line, even if it meant being misunderstood. That realization has reportedly hit Princess Anne the hardest. Anne grew up watching her mother shoulder responsibility without complaint. She admired it, emulated it. But reading the private words of a woman who felt isolated by the very role she mastered has forced Anne to confront an uncomfortable truth. Strength can be lonely, and silence can be expensive. Those close to an SAI she now views her mother less as a monarch and more as a woman who carried an impossible burden alone. A woman who believed that if she endured quietly, others wouldn't have to. That perspective has shaped how it approaches the question everyone keeps asking behind closed doors. What, if anything, should be revealed? There is concern about precedent. Once private materials are released, they can't be taken back. Words written in confidence can be stripped of nuance. Emotions can be reframed as weaknesses. And Elizabeth, more than anyone, understood how easily context gets lost. That's why some advisors argue the safest choice is permanent silence. But there's another argument gaining quiet traction. One that suggests Elizabeth may have underestimated the public's ability to understand complexity. That perhaps showing the cost of duty wouldn't weaken the monarchy but humanize it. That future generations might benefit from knowing that even the most composed ruler in modern history struggled privately, doubted herself, and still chose service. This debate has reportedly influenced King Charles more than expected. His reign has already been marked by a more open tone, a willingness to speak about personal interests and social issues. Reading his mother's private reflections has forced him to reconsider how much openness is too much and how much silence is too little. For now, everything remains locked away again, preserved, catalogued, protected. Princess Anne reportedly reviews the materials occasionally, not out of obsession, but responsibility. Each reading reveals something new, a line that hits differently, a moment that carries more weight with time. The documents haven't lost their power, they've gained it. And perhaps that's the point. Queen Elizabeth II ruled longer than any British monarch in history. She guided the crown through collapse, reinvention, and survival. But the greatest challenge she faced may have been the one no one sobbing human in a role that demanded perfection. The secrets she left behind don't expose scandal. They expose sacrifice. They reveal that the crown's stability was not effortless, but earned through discipline, silence, and emotional restraint few could maintain. Princess Anne now holds those truths, along with a decision that has no perfect answer. Whether the world ever reads Elizabeth's private words remains uncertain. But for those who have, one thing is clear. The woman behind the crown was far more complex, vulnerable, and burdened than history ever showed. An understanding that may be the most powerful legacy she left behind. And yet, even with all that insight, the question still hangs over the palace like a shadow. If Queen Elizabeth knew her silence came at such a personal cost, why did she maintain it until the very end? According to those who've studied her private reflections, the answer wasn't fear of exposure. It was fear of consequence. She believed the monarchy wasn't held together by truth alone, but by continuity. By the sense that something solid existed above the noise of the moment. And once that illusion cracked, it might never fully recover. That belief was shaped by history. Elizabeth witnessed abdication, war, empire collapse, and public scandal long before modern outrage cycles existed. She learned early that every royal misstep echoed far beyond the individual. So, when faced with personal pain, family fractures, or moments of doubt, she chose the same response again and again: absorb it, contain it, move forward. Not because it was easy, but because she believed no one else could. What's striking, according to insiders, is that Elizabeth never portrayed herself as heroic in her private words. She didn't glorify endurance, she simply accepted it. There are reportedly moments in her writings where she acknowledged exhaustion, even quiet resentment toward the role she never chose but could never escape. And yet, in the very next lines, she recommitted herself to it. Not out of pride, out of obligation. That mindset now places Princess Anne in an impossible position. Anne understands better than anyone what her mother sacrificed. She also understands what revealing too much could do to the institution Elizabeth spent her life protecting. Every option carries risk. Lock everything away, and the Queen remains distant forever. Reveal too much, and the mystique Elizabeth guarded could dissolve overnight. Some within the palace believe time itself will make the decision. Set decades from now, when emotions have cooled and the monarchy has evolved further. Selective release could offer clarity without chaos. Others argue that the most respectful choice is permanent silence, that some truths aren't meant for public consumption, no matter how compelling they are. Anne, by all accounts, hasn't rushed toward either conclusion. She's methodical, careful, much like her mother. Those close to her say she often asks a single question before making any move. Does this serve understanding, or does it simply satisfy curiosity? And until she can answer that honestly, nothing will change. Meanwhile, the existence of these materials has already altered the family in subtle ways. Conversations are different now. Decisions are weighed with more awareness of unseen costs. There's a shared understanding that strength doesn't always look the way the public expects it to. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like restraint. And sometimes it looks like a woman writing her doubts on paper and locking them away so no one else has to carry them. Queen Elizabeth II will always be remembered as a symbol of stability. But for those who have glimpsed her private world, that stability came at a price few could imagine. The secrets she left behind don't diminish her legacy, they deepen it. They reveal that the longest-reigning monarch in British history wasn't immune to fear, loneliness, or doubt. She simply chose to carry them alone. Princess Anne now stands as the final gatekeeper of that truth, and whatever she decides, one reality remains unchanged. Behind the crown was not perfection, but perseverance. Not distance, but discipline. And not silence because she felt nothing but silence because she felt too much. Because sometimes the strongest rulers in history aren't remembered for what they revealed, but for everything they chose to endure without ever letting the world see it for generations. Queen Elizabeth II was treated less like a person and more like a permanent fixture of history. She was the crown itself, timeless, unshakable, but the quiet reality emerging behind. Palace doors suggest something far more complicated. Her strength wasn't effortless. It was maintained daily, deliberately, often at great personal cost. She didn't avoid vulnerability because she lacked it. She avoided it because she believed the monarchy could not afford it. That belief shaped everything. It dictated when she spoke and, more importantly, when she didn't. It influenced how she handled grief, criticism, and family fractures. It meant enduring moments of deep isolation so the institution could appear unified. And it meant accepting that history might never fully understand her choices. What Princess Anne discovered, whether ever shared publicly or not, has already fulfilled one purpose. It has reframed Elizabeth not as a distant symbol, but as a woman who understood the fragility of the crown better than anyone else. A woman who believed her role was to absorb pressure so others wouldn't have to, even her own family. And that leaves one final, haunting thought. If the strongest monarch of the modern era felt she had to lock away her true thoughts to protect the crown, what does that say about the weight future generations will carry? The monarchy moves forward in a world that demands openness, relatability, and constant access. Elizabeth's private words stand as both a warning and a lesson. Stability has a cost. Silence has consequences. And leadership at its highest level often requires sacrifices the public never sees. Princess Anne now carries those truths forward. Whether she ever releases them is almost beside the point, because the moment the safe was opened, something irreversible happened. The myth cracked just enough to reveal the human beneath it. And in that quiet revelation lies Queen Elizabeth II's final legacy. Not just a crown that endured, but a woman who bore its weight alone so the world could believe it never wavered. And even now, long after the safe was opened and the initial shock settled, its impact continues in ways few outside the palace can see. Those who work closest to the royal family say decisions feel heavier, conversations last longer. There's a new awareness that every choice, every public word, every silence will one day be judged without the full story. Elizabeth understood that better than anyone, and her private writings reportedly return to that idea again and again. History is never kind to nuance. It prefers clear villains, clear heroes, and simple explanations. The Queen knew real leadership rarely fits that mold. That understanding is why some believe she never intended these materials to be revealed in the dramatic sense people imagine, not exposed, not sensationalized, but understood quietly by those who would inherit the burden she carried. In that sense, the documents were never about the public at all. They were a guide, a warning, and perhaps a form of closure she never allowed herself while alive. Princess Anne, more than anyone, seems to grasp that distinction. She hasn't treated the discovery as leverage or legacy building. She's treated it as stewardship. Those close to her say she often rereads the same passages, not looking for answers, but for perspective, as if trying to understand not just what her mother endured, but why she chose to endure it alone. And that's where the story truly ends. Not with a dramatic reveal, not with scandal, but with a quiet reckoning. Queen Elizabeth II spent 70 years convincing the world that the crown was steady, unshaken, and unchanging. What her private words reveal is that this stability was not accidental. It was protected carefully, relentlessly, at the expense of her own emotional freedom. Behind the crown was not a mystery waiting to be solved, but a sacrifice waiting to be recognized. Princess Anne now holds that recognition, and whether the world ever sees it or not, the truth has already done its work. It has changed how the royal family understands its past. It has reshaped how they approach the future, and it has finally answered a question many never thought to ask. Not how Queen Elizabeth ruled for so long, but what it cost her to do so in silence.